The scent of roasting chicken and rosemary hung in the air, a fragrance I had come to think of as the very aroma of happiness itself. Sunday dinners were my religion, and this kitchen was my cathedral. Golden afternoon light streamed through the large windows, catching the dust motes dancing above the salad bowl I was carrying to the table. The table itself was a chaotic masterpiece, set with my grandmother's china, a vibrant, mismatched quilt of plates that each held a memory. Laughter echoed from the living room, where my husband, David, was undoubtedly losing another dramatic battle against our daughter, Sarah, in a board game. Her triumphant shrieks were the punctuation marks of our weekends. I allowed myself a moment, leaning against the doorframe just to watch them. David, his hair more silver now than brown, threw his hands up in mock surrender as Sarah crowed over her victory. At 25, she still had the unrestrained joy of the little girl who used to dance in puddles. This was the picture I had worked my whole life to create. This warmth, this noise, this unshakable foundation. It was not perfect, but it was real. It was ours. The doorbell chimed, its cheerful sound cutting through the domestic symphony. "They are here," Sarah yelled, abandoning the game board and rushing to the door. My heart did a little flip, the way it always did when Marcus was coming home. My son, my firstborn, I followed Sarah, my hands wiping nervously on my apron, a habit I could never break. And there he was, Marcus. He looked so much like his father with the same serious brown eyes and strong jaw, but he had my smile. Or at least he used to. He was carrying little Leo in his arms, our grandson, a chubby-cheeked angel who was already reaching for me with grabby hands. "Grandma," he squealed, and the sound was pure, undiluted magic. "Oh, my beautiful boy," I breathed, taking him from Marcus and burying my face in his soft, sweet-smelling hair. I hugged him tight, this living, breathing proof that our family was growing, thriving. Then my eyes moved to Chloe, standing just behind Marcus. "Chloe, darling, you look lovely," I said, and I meant it. She was picture-perfect, as always. Her blonde hair was sleek, her makeup flawless, her linen dress crisp and expensive. She offered me that smile of hers, the one that showed all her perfectly straight, white teeth. It was a beautiful smile, but it never quite reached her eyes. I had always chalked it up to shyness. "Thank you, Lena. Something smells incredible," she said, her voice a smooth, even cadence. She handed me a bottle of wine with a label that looked far too sophisticated for my simple cooking. We moved into the living room, a torrent of conversation and movement. David clapped Marcus on the back, Sarah fawned over Leo, and I busied myself with final dinner preparations, my spirit buoyed by the happy noise. This was the crescendo of my week, the point where the orchestra swelled. We settled around the table, plates piled high, and the stories began to flow. David recounted a ridiculous story from his golf game, and Sarah teased Marcus about a childhood incident involving a frog and a pair of her best tights. We were laughing, really laughing, the kind that makes your stomach hurt. But as the meal progressed, I began to notice a fracture in the harmony. Marcus, who was usually at the center of the family ribbing, grew quiet. He pushed his food around his plate, his responses to David's questions becoming shorter, more clipped. He was not rude, just distant. A quiet tension seemed to radiate from him, a cold spot at our warm table. And Chloe, I watched her. She sat with impeccable posture, that placid smile never leaving her face. She nodded along to the stories, she made polite comments about the food, but she was a spectator, not a participant. Her hand would occasionally rest on Marcus's arm, a gesture that should have been comforting, but it looked possessive, controlling. Each time she touched him, he seemed to stiffen further. The smile, which I had once found merely reserved, now began to feel unnatural. A mask. A beautiful, impenetrable mask. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. This was more than a bad day at work. This was a shift in the atmosphere, a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. I caught David's eye across the table, and a flicker of concern passed between us. He saw it too. Finally, as Sarah was clearing the dessert plates, Marcus cleared his throat. The sound was abrupt, a deliberate punctuation mark in the fading chatter. The room fell silent. "Mom, Dad, Sarah," he began, his voice low and oddly formal. "There is something we need to tell you." My blood ran cold, that we. It included Chloe, who was now standing, moving to stand just behind his chair, her hands resting on his shoulders. Her expression had not changed. The smile was still there, fixed and unwavering. Marcus took a deep breath, as if he had rehearsed this moment. He did not look at me, he stared at a point on the wall just above David's head. Chloe and I have made a decision. We are moving. We have put an offer on a house in North Carolina, and it was accepted. My transfer at work has been approved. We will be leaving at the end of the month. The words landed like physical blows. North Carolina, 1,000 miles away, taking Leo. The air was sucked out of the room. I could not breathe. I looked from Marcus's stoic, cold face to Chloe standing behind him. And in that moment, her serene smile transformed. It was no longer placid. It was not a mask of politeness. As her eyes met mine over my son's shoulder, her smile seemed to sharpen, to become triumphant. It was a victor's smile. She had won. She was taking him away from us, from me, and she was glad. The warmth of the evening shattered into a million icy shards. The vibrant home I had built felt like a hollow film set. I looked at my son, a stranger sitting in my son's chair, and the betrayal was so profound it was a physical pain in my chest. This could not be happening. My hands, resting in my lap, began to tremble. I clenched them into fists, my nails digging into my palms, clinging to that small, sharp pain as the only real thing in a world that was suddenly, terrifyingly, falling apart. The last thing I saw before my vision blurred was Chloe's unwavering, victorious smile, a silent declaration of a war I did not even know we were fighting. The world had not snapped back into focus. It was still tilted on its axis, the colors all wrong, the sounds muffled as if I were underwater. I had managed to drive home from Marcus's apartment on autopilot, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were a stark, bloodless white. The for sale sign was not a hallucination. It was a declaration of war, planted on the front lawn of my life. I do not remember walking into my house. I must have, because I found myself standing in the center of the living room, the silence of the place pressing in on me. This was the home I had built for us. Every piece of furniture, every paint color, chosen with the thought of creating a warm, stable nest. The worn patch on the rug where Marcus used to build his Lego castles. The faint pencil marks on the doorframe charting his growth from a little boy to a young man. It was all a museum now, a monument to a history that had just been declared null and void. I could not breathe, the walls were closing in. I needed an anchor, a voice of reason to pull me back from the edge of this abyss. My fingers trembled as I fumbled for my phone, scrolling through contacts until I found the one person who had always seen the world with unflinching clarity. My sister, Carol. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert even at this hour. "Lena, what is wrong? It is late." Just hearing her voice broke the dam. The words tumbled out, a chaotic, tear-choked torrent about the sign, the move, Marcus's hollow eyes, the suffocating presence of Chloe in the background. I told her everything, my voice cracking under the weight of a betrayal I still could not fully comprehend. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could picture her, probably in her own immaculate kitchen, a cup of tea going cold as she processed the information. Carol did not react, she analyzed. Then she spoke, and her words were like a cold splash of water. "Lena, you cannot possibly be surprised by this. That girl has been orchestrating this for years. Chloe is the architect. Marcus is just carrying the bricks." A cold dread, colder than the shock, seeped into my bones. "What do you mean? She has always been difficult, but—" "Difficult?" Carol's laugh was short, bitter. "Lena, open your eyes, remember Thanksgiving? When she made that comment about your cooking being quaint and how Marcus deserved to experience a more sophisticated lifestyle, or Christmas, when she joked that you were trying to buy his love with expensive gifts, it was not difficult. It was calculated. She has been systematically separating him, brick by brick. I have said it before, and I will say it now. She sees you as a rival for his affection, and she will not rest until you are completely erased." Hearing my deepest, most unspoken fear voiced aloud by someone else made it real. It was no longer a paranoid whisper in the back of my mind, it was a diagnosis. Carol was merely vocalizing the suspicion that had taken root in my own heart the moment I saw that sign. Chloe was the poison. But how had it worked so effectively? What had I done to make my own son so susceptible? After I hung up with Carol, the silence of the house was even more profound. Determination, a brittle but sharp thing, began to pierce through the fog of my grief. I had to understand. I had to retrace my steps, our steps, and find the moment the foundation cracked. I needed to look at my own reflection in the ruins. I walked through the rooms, my fingers trailing over surfaces, triggering a flood of memories. I remembered the fierce, all-consuming love I felt when Marcus was placed in my arms for the first time. I was so young, so terrified of repeating the chaotic, unstable childhood I had endured. I had sworn an oath to myself, a silent vow etched into my soul: he would have everything I never did. Consistency, security, unconditional love. I saw myself working double shifts, my body aching with exhaustion, just so he could have new shoes for soccer, so he could go on that school trip to Washington, D.C. I remembered the pride on his face when he graduated, the hugs that were genuine and full of life. I had poured every ounce of my being into building this home, this life for him. Was it too much? Had my love become a weight instead of a shelter? The doubt was a venomous thought, and I fought it back. No, a mother's love is not a cage. It is a fortress, or at least it should be. My wandering led me to the small home office, a corner of the room dominated by an old desktop computer we all used for printing tickets or looking up recipes. It was a relic, really. Marcus had his own laptop, and I used my tablet. This machine was a digital ghost town, but ghosts can speak. A thought, terrible and compelling, struck me. What if there was a record? What if the calculated plan Carol spoke of was not just intuition, but something concrete? Chloe was meticulous, arrogant. Would she be careless? I sank into the worn office chair and pressed the power button. The machine whirred to life with a familiar groan. I navigated to the email client, which was still logged into the family account we had used for years. Marcus had his own address now, but for a long time, this was his primary one. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This felt like a violation, a descent into a darkness I was not sure I wanted to see. But I had to know. I started searching. Her name, his name, dates around major holidays, birthdays, times when tensions had flared. At first, it was just junk mail and old newsletters. Then I found a folder I had never noticed before. It was labeled M Future. It seemed innocuous, perhaps something related to college applications. I clicked on it. And the world stopped. Inside were emails, but not to colleges. They were from Chloe to Marcus. Dozens of them. Sent over the course of nearly 2 years. My breath hitched as I opened the first one, dated around the Thanksgiving Carol had mentioned. The words on the screen were not those of a loving partner. They were a blueprint for alienation. I read, my blood turning to ice in my veins. Marcus, I know you feel guilty, but you have to see how she manipulates you. That comment about the car insurance, it was not a casual remark. It was a reminder that you owe her. She keeps you indebted, emotionally and financially. A real mother would want you to be free. Another email from after my birthday last year. Did you see how she looked at the necklace I gave you? It was pure jealousy. She cannot stand that you have someone else in your life who cares for you. She wants to be the only woman you love. It is not healthy, my love. It is suffocating. Page after page, a systematic, patient campaign. She reframed every family dinner I asked him to attend as a demand. My concern for his health during a bad flu was smothering. My excitement about his graduation was making the day all about her. She took every normal, loving interaction of a close-knit family and twisted it into something dark and pathological. She was not just pointing out flaws. She was inventing them, painting a grotesque caricature of me and presenting it to my son as the truth. But the most chilling email was the most recent, sent just a few months ago. The subject line was simple: our fresh start. Marcus, we have talked about this. We cannot build our future here, not with the constant interference. The distance is necessary. It is the only way we can truly be together without the toxic shadow of your past. It is not abandoning her, it is saving ourselves. I have already started looking at properties on the coast. It will be a clean break. You will see. Once we are away from all the negativity, you will feel like a new man. You will finally be free. I sat back, the screen blurring before my eyes. It was all there. Not a suspicion, not a theory. It was evidence. A cold, clinical, and brutally effective strategy to isolate my son. She had not just driven a wedge. She had taken a sledgehammer to the very foundation of our relationship and then convinced him that I was the one holding the hammer. The heartbreak did not vanish, but it transformed. It solidified into something else, something hard and sharp and dangerous. A cold, righteous fury began to burn in the pit of my stomach, so intense it dried the tears on my cheeks. This was not my failure. This was sabotage. But as I stared at the glowing screen, a final, horrifying thought crystallized. She had written this plan. She had executed it. But Marcus had read it. He had received these words, these poisonous ideas, and he had not deleted them. He had saved them in a folder. He had believed them. The rain had started as a fine mist, but by the time I parked the car at the edge of the old riverfront park, it was a steady, insistent drizzle. It was the kind of rain that did not cleanse, but only made things damp and cold and miserable. A perfect reflection of the interior weather of my soul. I saw their car already there, Marcus's sensible sedan parked under the skeletal branches of a weeping willow. The choice of location was mine, a public but desolate place where our voices could be swallowed by the wind and the rush of the river. I could not have this conversation within the four walls of my home, the home I had built for us. Those walls would have absorbed the poison of what was about to be said, and I could not bear to contaminate my sanctuary. I sat for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles were white. The manila envelope on the passenger seat seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. It contained the photographs, the credit card statements, the timeline I had pieced together with the grim determination of a forensic accountant. It was my evidence, my ammunition. But holding it, I did not feel powerful. I felt like a coroner holding an autopsy report for a loved one. I finally forced myself to move, clutching the envelope to my chest like a shield. The cold air hit me, a physical shock that did nothing to numb the burning in my heart. I walked across the sodden grass towards the two figures standing by the river's edge. They were huddled under a large black umbrella, a united front that made my stomach turn. Marcus looked pale, his shoulders slumped. Chloe stood slightly behind him, her face a mask of defiant anxiety. She looked young, too young, and for a fleeting second, a wave of pity threatened to undo me. I crushed it. There was no room for pity now. "Mother," Marcus said, his voice thin and strained. Could we not have done this somewhere else?" "No," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady, a cold, flat stone in the swirling river of my emotions. "We could not. This ends here, today." I thrust the envelope toward him. He did not take it. "What is that?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling. "The truth," I said, my eyes never leaving my son's face. "A concept you both seem to have a very flexible relationship with. It is all in there, Marcus. The trips to Savannah I did not know about. The hotel bills paid for with the emergency fund card, the one for your car repairs. The dinners for two at restaurants you told me you were attending for client meetings." Marcus's face crumpled. He looked from the envelope to my face, and I saw the shame warring with a strange, stubborn resentment in his eyes. "You have been spying on me." A bitter laugh escaped my lips, harsh and unnatural. "Spying? I am your mother. I was worrying. I was noticing that my son, my only child, had become a ghost, telling me lies with every other breath. I was putting the pieces together because the picture you were showing me was a fake. So, yes, I investigated the discrepancy, and I found this." I shook the envelope. "I found her." Chloe stepped forward then, a flicker of fire in her eyes. "Mrs. Delaney, you do not understand. What Marcus and I have, it is real. It is not some sordid affair." "Is it not?" I turned my gaze fully on her, and she flinched under its intensity. "You are his student, he is your professor. He is married, he has a family. Or did you forget that part? What would you call it if not sordid?" "It is love," she cried out, and the raw desperation in her voice was like a physical blow. "You have no idea the pressure he is under, the weight of your expectations. This family name, this legacy you are always talking about, it is suffocating him." The words hung in the damp air, more damaging than any accusation I could have leveled. I looked at Marcus, my son, the boy I had raised alone, the man I had been so proud of. "Is that true?" The question was a whisper, but it carried across the space between us. "Have I suffocated you?" Marcus would not meet my eyes. He stared at the churning, gray water of the river as if it held the answers. "Mother, you do not understand." "Make me understand," I pleaded, my composure beginning to crack. "Please, Marcus, for 28 years, I have done nothing but fight for you, build a life for you. Everything I have done." "That is the problem?" he exploded, his voice suddenly loud, raw with a pain I had never heard before. "Everything. It is always about what you have done. The great Lena Delaney, who built an empire from nothing for her son. Do you have any idea what it is like to live under that shadow? To know that every choice I make, every step I take is measured against your monumental sacrifice? I can never just be Marcus. I am always Lena Delaney's son, the reason for her entire existence. It is a weight I cannot breathe under. Each word was a shard of glass, tearing into the very fabric of my being. The foundation of my life, my identity as a mother, was cracking apart beneath my feet. So this, I gestured weakly toward Chloe, this deception, this betrayal of your wife, of me, this is your way of breathing, by destroying everything. It is not destruction, he said, his voice dropping again, thick with emotion. It is freedom. With Chloe, I am not a legacy, I am not an obligation, I am just a man. She does not see me as your project. She sees me for who I am. The devastation was complete. It was not just the affair. It was the reason for it. I had been the anchor, but I had also been the chain. My love, my life's work, had become a prison to him. The rain felt colder now, seeping through my coat, chilling me to the bone. I looked at the two of them, standing together under their shared umbrella, and I saw a chasm that I could not cross. The evidence in my hands was suddenly meaningless. The real evidence was standing before me, in my son's tortured eyes. I let the envelope fall to the wet grass. It landed with a soft, pathetic thud. I see, I said, and the words were empty, hollowed out. There was nothing left to fight for. The battle was over, and I had lost long before I even knew I was in a war. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting. The three of us stood there, ghosts at the river's edge, the rushing water the only sound of a world moving on without us. The days that followed were a blur of gray stillness. I moved through my house like a phantom, the echoes of our confrontation reverberating in every room. The grief was a physical presence, a leaden weight in my chest. It was followed by a cold, sharp anger, at Marcus, at Chloe, but most of all at myself. Had I loved him too much? Had I held on too tightly, smothering the very person I was trying to protect? The questions had no answers, only more pain. Slowly, the storm of emotions began to subside, leaving behind a bleak, painful shore. Acceptance was not a sudden dawn, but a gradual fading of the night. I realized, with a clarity that was both terrible and liberating, that I had to let go. Not of my love for him, but of my need to control his life, to be the architect of his happiness. Holding on too tightly, I saw now, was its own form of letting go. It was letting go of his trust, his honesty, his ability to come to me as a man, not a boy. The resolution came at the airport, a place of perpetual transitions. Marcus was flying to a conference, but we both knew it was more than that. It was the first step on a path that was his alone to walk. We stood near the security line, an ocean of distance between us despite the mere feet that separated us. "I am sorry, Mother," he said, his voice low, "for the hurt, for the lies." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. I looked at my son, really looked at him. I saw the man he was, flawed and struggling, and I saw the boy he had been, whose scraped knees I had kissed. The love was still there, a deep, unbreakable cord, but it was different now. It was quieter. "I love you, Marcus," I said, the words simple and true. "That will never change, but you have to find your own way, even if I do not agree with it." He reached out and squeezed my hand, a brief, fragile contact. "I know." There were no grand gestures, no promises of reconciliation. There was only a quiet, meaningful goodbye that acknowledged the broken trust and the long road ahead. As I watched him walk away, disappearing into the crowd, I felt a profound shift within me. The fight was over. My focus was no longer on fighting for my son, but on fortifying the legacy and the home I had built for myself. A new strength, born of this brutal independence, began to stir in the emptiness he had left behind. I turned from the security gate, my heels clicking on the polished floor, and walked back into my own life. But as I reached the automatic doors, leading back to the world, a new and unsettling thought began to form, a question mark hanging over the fragile peace I had just found. If my love was a weight, then what did that make the legacy I had dedicated my life to building? And who would be left to carry it when I was gone?